actually just finished a class this morning and came rushing over here to be a part of it. I'm really very pleased to be able to be here, and I thank you for showing up. So let me get started with a few basics, and we'll go with the course objectives is to be able to mind the goal of each individual of your organization by understanding gender differences, build collaboration and innovation, and we'll get to that more specifically, by identifying and permeating organizational culture with new competencies. And I specifically use this word competency because if we say different values or different perspectives, it's not tangible. And what I want is, in the more individualistic world that is the prevailing culture of our businesses, I want something that's more tangible, like a skill. So that's how I name them as competencies. To increase promotability of people who work effectively with different communication styles and competencies, men and women. And enrich organizational community, begin a dialogue for valuing differences to take into the workplace and the global marketplace. Now here we're segueing to this whole idea of the global marketplace. 70% of the world's cultures are more relational than the United States. So as we start to learn about gender differences, and I'm beginning to segue also into using the word relational. Instead of talking about women and men, I prefer to use these more cross-cultural terms of relational for the prevailing culture of women and individualistic for the prevailing culture of men. Understanding that they're also people that switch or in between. But in any case, when we understand that 70% of the world's cultures are more relational, there's also a doorway from understanding gender differences to understanding cultural differences through the same kind of language and in terms of competencies, not just cultural practices. And ultimately, this is my grand finale slide that I now realize that I have to move up. If you ever heard the expression, would you just get to the point? High context, relational women often we tell such grand stories, but okay, where are we going on this? This is where we're going. The ideal of being able to bring individualistic and relational together and what's possible when the chemistry comes together. I had my own experience right out of college in small business that was very innovative and very creative. Very fiery relationship with my boss, but it was very innovative. And that's one of the things that had me really be interested in this whole area and what's possible with innovation. Just some basics, and this is more of a cross-cultural perspective. Usually, some of you probably have studied different cultures. Usually, in studying different cultures, there's an emphasis on your relationship to relationship, information, and time. I added one more component here, but the individualistic culture is one of emphasizing status and independence, whereas relational is more emphasizing connection and interdependence. Individualistic giving information only as needed, whereas relational is sharing information for the possibility of even creating new information. And in terms of time, doing one thing at a time, being highly focused for individualistic, and doing many things at once. And related to that is the web thinking, that seeing the interconnection or connecting the dots, we can call it, of web thinking of relational, whereas step thinking or more compartmentalized thinking is the more individualistic. Now, keep thinking, we need both, but we need to understand each other and be able to value both. Innovation, what's gender got to do with it? So these are the aspects that I pulled out specifically that I think have to do with innovation. I mentioned connecting the dots. It's more of an inductive reasoning from specifics, but maybe a lot of specifics, into a more generalized theory or idea or result or something that you want to accomplish. and complex high context thinking, seeing all the ramifications of an issue to prevent fires. This is all interrelated. Collaboration, sharing information, engaging together in thinking, communicating to build new ideas. Collective innovation, or collective ideas, there's another word for it, comes from groups that have more, I'll say, relational people, so more women. So, pardon me?
Synergies?
Well, it's synergies, but it's the idea, the terminology was used was collective intelligence, that's what it is. Is now being seen to be coming from diverse groups that have more women in it. I don't have I have to find out where that research came from. But that's certainly, it doesn't mean that individual intelligence isn't important, but it's a different possibility of innovation. Okay, the empowering of others, expanding the capacities of others to contribute is also an attribute that I consider to be a contributor to innovation. And values-based decision-making. Even in the Myers-Briggs personality profile, one of the things that is, well, the main thing that's gender significant is the difference between values-based decision-making and logic-based decision-making. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't values to logic-based, and there isn't a logic to values-based. But it does bring a different quality, a different dimension to the decision-making. I know that one of the anecdotes I picked up from a VP of HR for the talk that she was giving. I asked her what she brought to the executive team, and she felt that values-based decision-making was important. She gave the example of where the company was closing down a product, and of course everyone was working on it. Well, what are we going to do with them? The logical thing was to let them go, but the CEO and the senior executives they just couldn't bring themselves to let them go, and brought her in. They couldn't actually put it into words, or the idea, but she pointed out to them, look, we can use them in other parts of the company. And indeed they did, and retained the loyalty and the relationship with the employees and also the other employees that knew them. For some of us, it seems like logic, like, isn't this just common sense? And in fact, I've had numbers of women say what they bring to decision making is common sense. And I have pointed out that sometimes it's important to frame it in a different way, because this more relational way of looking, or values-based decision making, needs to be pointed out when it can be. I had the board, a woman from Stanford. There was a presentation on women on boards last few months, and she said that what she brought to the executive team or the board was common sense, and that she couldn't recommend a woman to be another woman member as a woman, but she was certainly an advocate for women. And afterwards, in the reception afterwards, I pulled her aside and I told her the Carol Bartz story. I said, I'm willing to bet what you say is common sense is the same thing as what Carol Bartz said. And she said, yeah, it is. And I said, could you be an advocate for having a systems thinker, someone who connects the dots, be on the board? And she said, yes, I could. So just giving her that language made a difference for her. It doesn't mean, there are men that are systems thinkers too, but what we're talking about is to be able to bring this diversity of thought for innovation. So these are the attributes that I've identified as being what can be the source of innovation. And I'm just looking at time. I think, and I'll just say our approach is a combination of brain science, cross-cultural understanding, which goes for gender culture and other cultures, communication and leadership styles, again, drawing on the literature of the time to point out how often what's being recommended is related to these differences in relational and individualistic and business organizational competencies. Actually, part of the communication is the linguistics and the focus on language, because I'll give you an example of the brain science that people really enjoy. I'm going to get to that in a moment. I just want to first give you this one, which is that although this is a model, it gives you a better idea of how we're not dealing with absolutes, that all men are one way and all women are another way. And there are many in between, and there's some that reverse. This is a cross-cultural piece. This is from cross-cultural. I mentioned cross-cultural before, but this demonstrates the differences in a very high-context way of looking at the world and a very focused way, what we can call low-context way of looking at the world, not just in conversation, but in general. And I always suggest that you consider what it would mean to move the lines from the eyes to the mouth, because that would also fit the picture of what I described earlier of the executive said that women, they can't get to the heart of the matter. They keep bringing in all this peripheral stuff. So it's a great demonstration of the misunderstandings and the inability for people to be able to use both ways of communicating and seeing and thinking together. Any questions or comments on this?
This is about how they communicate. Is that correct?
Well, it can be about how they communicate and what they see in a communication. That's what it is literally. And I'm suggesting that you can move it also to their mouths, because it comes out in their mouths as well.
Sure.
The long stories, like I could tell long stories all day, and I don't use much data. Mostly qualitative data for me. And it can also, the lines can go to your head in terms of the way you think. So what does it mean for relational people also to be able to speak the language of a more focused person? And also, what is it for a more focused, low context person to be able to serve a high context person? I have a couple of examples of papers. If we can, we'll get to it, which is just, I just love what the students are doing with this information. And this is the chart that shows the differences in cultures. It shows the American culture is way over on the left in terms of, well, it's not way over, but it's definitely more low context, and 70% of the world's cultures are more high context. This is a more recent cross-cultural depiction. It's a lot going on in the slide, but hey, this includes practically the whole world. So your more individualistic people are down here, the linear active, which is described, this is from When Cultures Collide, cool, factual, and decisive. And then there's the multi-active, warm, emotional, loquacious, and impulsive. That's up at the top. And the more, the reactive, courteous, amicable, accommodating, compromiser, and good listener, way down at the other end, and where everyone falls in between. But again, here is the more individualistic, and the more relational is up in that whole other quadrant. It's not a quadrant section. And this, in the classes, it's so exciting working, I'll just tell you, working with students from all different cultures.